I'm back. Hi. Yeah, I know it's been a hot second. Pretty much 14 months actually, to be exact. But here I am, 2 houses, 2 jobs, 1 new puppy, and several tattoos later. I am finally sitting down to film again, and feels so good. Anyway, before I went on my giant break from YouTube, I did run a poll on my channel to see what kinds of cases you guys were interested in, and to my surprise, overwhelmingly you guys wanted more New Zealand crime content, and well, do I have a story for you. Today's case is cooked, honestly. I cannot believe that I hadn't heard of it. It actually is quite a high profile case here in New Zealand as well, so it amazes me that like the trial and everything just completely passed me by. I don't know what I was doing. I guess I was in high school. But you truly will think I'm making this shit up because it's insane. Like every single step of the way, it just gets more outrageous and more ludicrous. It's like, feels like the plot of a movie. And even then you'd be like, this can't be real. Like this can't be a movie script. Like this is just too far off the reservation. But no, I'm telling you, this shit is real. This happened, and buckle up, my dudes, because this one is freaking wild. So today we are talking about New Zealand's Black Widow, aka Helen Milner. As always, all sources are listed in the description box below. Now, just a heads up, there are a ton of moving parts to this case. There are heaps of tiny little details that kind of jump all over the show, so the timeline might kind of move around a little bit. Now, before we get into today's case, I just want to thank you for being here, and please go ahead and like this video if you do, and hit subscribe if you want to. Otherwise, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. So today's story takes place in Christchurch, which is on the east coast of the South Island in New Zealand. Christchurch has a population of 381,500, and to be honest, a pretty rough history of pretty violent, serious crimes, some of which I have covered before and some of which I might cover in the future. But today's story begins on the morning of May 4th, 2009. At around 6 a.m, Southwest Christchurch Police Department received a 111 call. On the other end was 46-year-old Helen Milner, who was in hysterics, claiming that she had discovered her husband, Phil Nisbet, who was a truck driver, 47 years old, was dead. Now, there wasn't a lot going on that morning, so police were able to rush directly to the scene at 70A Checketts Avenue in Hallswell. When they arrived, police pulled up outside a small suburban single-level home, and outside the front of the house was a distressed Helen Milner standing there in a big white fluffy dressing gown. Inside the house, it was freezing cold. Now, May is about late autumn in New Zealand, and let me tell you a thing about New Zealand housing. Our shit was not built to withstand cold temperatures, or hot temperatures for that matter. In fact, housing in New Zealand is notoriously bad for being built for weather of any kind. So the fact that the inside of the house was freezing and damp is not actually unusual or out of the ordinary. Now, when they got inside, Helen led them into the living room. She sat herself down on the couch and she was just hysterical. Beside her was this folded up thick duvet, suggesting that someone had slept there. Helen told the police where to go in the house to find the bedroom. When they went inside, they found Philip Nisbet lying on his back diagonally across the bed with his eyes open, and he was visibly dead. He was rugged up and covered with a white duvet, but Helen's side of the bed looked unslept. In Philip's bedside drawer were 2 empty packets of Finnegan, which is an antihistamine sedative drug. Next to that, there was a half-empty glass of water on the bedside table, which was also within arm's reach. Police asked Helen what had happened, but she was just completely inconsolable and unable to hold a conversation or answer any questions. Eventually, after a bit of cajoling, police were able to determine that the previous night, Helen had gone to bed about an hour before her husband fell. She said that she got up at 2 a.m. because she's a diabetic and she needed some insulin. She said she administered the insulin in the kitchen, and then, not wanting to wake or disturb her husband, she spent the rest of the night asleep on the couch. She claims that when she woke up in the morning, she found Philip dead. Now, as police were at the house kind of looking around, throughout the course of their visit, Helen's sobs became increasingly dramatic. Like, she was getting more and more worked up. They said that her reaction was actually really dominating the scene and that they found it a little unusual. Now, we know that people grieve in different ways, so it could be that Helen genuinely was truly taken by this accidental death and really was that hysterical, but police say that her profound reaction kind of started to nag at them. They thought it was a little odd. They didn't really know what to do, so instead of like putting an arm around her to comfort Helen while she was crying, the police continued to kind of work their way through the house, sort of checking out the scene. They also started calling friends and loved ones to find someone to come and support Helen and I guess inform them of the sad news. One of the detectives phoned their supervising sergeant and reported in on what had happened, while the other continued to look around the house. They were looking to see if there was anything about Philip's death that was kind of out of the ordinary. He said he paused when he noticed the insulin in the kitchen, but before he could kind of take a better look at anything, he got distracted because Helen's sobs grew even louder and more frantic and distressed. Apparently at that time, she let out like this intense howl and just started screaming, quote, "He's done it, he's killed himself." She held out a mobile phone to the officers and there was a little text message on the screen that read, quote, "I'm sorry, honey, I can't keep going like this. I love you so much. Please take care and tell Ben I love him." Unquote. Now that was sent on the 3rd of May at 10:30 p.m, so the evening before. Both officers felt like a bit uneasy about this. They thought that Helen's prolonged grief was really strange, and like, I'll be the first to admit, I have never been to a scene like this in my life. I don't actually know what officers would consider like normal reaction, but the fact that they kept mentioning it about how strange her behavior was obviously suggests that it was like very much out of the ordinary. One of them said that he just had never seen anything like it and that she was just wailing and wailing and wailing, but there were no tears. And the other one said that he really felt like she was acting, and it's giving David Payne, honestly. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll leave a little, video link up there. But then despite the two officers kind of like nagging suspicion that something was wrong, when the supervising sergeant showed up, he basically was like, "Nah, this is an open and shut case of nothing to see here, no investigation needed, pack up and go home." And this decision meant that there was no crime scene examination. They didn't gather evidence, or like they took some basic stuff like the Finnegan packets, but there was no thorough examination of the scene, meaning that all kinds of really key pieces of information were lost. When the autopsy results came back, they showed that Philip had likely died from an overdose of the drug Finnegan. It turned out that Phil was also really allergic to this drug. However, police, still believing this was a reported that to the coroner. The end. No, I'm just kidding. Although that is where the police would have left the story if it had been up to them. So Helen was brought in to make a statement to the police about 8 days after Philip's death. She spoke to Detective Richard Prosser at the police station about her relationship with Phil. She told detectives that she and Phil met in about 2001. Family and friends attended their wedding, which was just a small little gathering at their Hallswell home. They got married in November 2005. So I guess they dated for, a few years before they tied the knot. Phil grew up in Christchurch's eastern suburbs. He went to Burwood Primary and Shirley Boys High School. He also had 2 children from previous relationships. Phil was a keen golfer who also enjoyed playing pool, squash, riding motorbikes, and collecting model cars. Helen said the couple had their ups and downs and that they actually split for about 4 months the year after they got married. However, she said that they got back together and on the whole, they were very happy. Helen said that the day before Phil died, they had a really nice time together. She told detectives that she thought Phil died from a drug overdose and that she was angry at him leaving her because they had so many plans together for the future. She said she felt that she must have let him down in some way if he felt he couldn't come and talk to her if he was struggling to deal with things. Now at this point, they've got their autopsy report, they've got this very nice and tidy statement from Helen, and detectives were pretty much ready to close the case and call it a day. But then we wouldn't be here, would we? So yeah, there's more. Oh, did I mention that at the same time that Helen is making her statement to police, just 8 days after her husband's complete surprise death, she's actually texting and chatting up an old flame. But yes, I will get to that in a minute. So there was one person who just couldn't get right with the idea that Phil had stuff. Just couldn't accept it, wouldn't accept it. Enter Philip's sister, Lee-Anne Cartier. So later on the day of his death, Philip's sister Lee-Anne received a devastating phone call at her home in Caloundra, which is on the Sunshine Coast of Australia. It was her father, and he let her know of her brother's devastating death by a parent. Her father told her that Phil was dead, that he'd been found in his lorry, and police at that stage believed that he and Lee-Anne just could not comprehend it. Her brother had been fit, healthy, and just weeks earlier planning to relocate to Australia. She couldn't understand why Phil would plan an entire new life in Australia just weeks before and then just decide to end it all. So her brother Phil was the oldest of the 4 siblings, and Lee-Anne was the youngest. They had 2 brothers in between, Andrew and Roger. Lee-Anne has fond memories of when she would ride on the back of Philip's motorbike when she was a kid, when he would take her to Girls Brigade. She described him as the goody-good in the family and said that he didn't even go to a pub until he was 21. And to put that into context, here in New Zealand, and I believe in Australia as well, the legal drinking age is actually 18. So people can go clubbing at the age of 18, and pretty much everyone does. It's kind of like the rite of passage. So to not go until you're 21, like 3 full years after you're allowed to go, is quite unusual. I've not really heard of that much. Most people just can't wait to go, like just rip the band-aid off and now you're finally an adult. So anyway, those memories were from 40 years ago. And later on, Lee-Anne and the family relocated to Australia, but Philip decided to stay in New Zealand. And Lee-Anne says that she and Phil were very close and they maintained a really good relationship despite the difference. And the two would try and visit each other across the ditch as much as they could. But they did start to drift apart once Phil married divorced single mother Helen Milner. Lee-Anne described the change. Quote, "Before he met her, we'd go over there. We'd go out and have a lot of fun. We had a lot of good times, but once she came along, it was only family dinners I saw her at all. Phil was a very private person. If he was having problems with Helen, he's not the sort of person who would put it out there. He would just put on a smile," unquote. So you can imagine how things might have been a little awkward when Lee-Anne flew back to New Zealand to help Helen organise Phil's funeral. And Lee-Anne said that Helen's behaviour at the funeral was like super suspicious and that she was just very matter-of-fact about things and acted almost as though everybody had come to see her. Like it was like she was the star of the show. And again, where have we seen this? And something else that was really weird and kind of raised a lot of red flags for Lee-Anne is that Helen would not leave Lee-Anne alone with Philip's body, like at all, like not even like once. Like she just would not leave the two alone, which is really strange. Like, what do you care? Do you know what I mean? Like what was the issue? And she was getting Philip cremated as well. So it seems really cruel to deny his sister that time to, you know, make her peace and say goodbye. Now, Lee-Anne says that her relationship with Helen really broke down in 2006. And apparently it was because Lee-Anne's son Lance had been in New Zealand staying with Phil and Helen, and apparently he said something that upset Helen, and Lance phoned Lee-Anne to tell her about the row that they'd had. Lee-Anne said that it was really difficult at the funeral to try and say goodbye to Phil because Helen's presence was just there all the time. She just wouldn't leave her alone, and she felt that rift that was between them, and she couldn't help but feel frustration and resentment that she'd lost these precious years with her brother because of this woman, you know? Like, even if Helen had done nothing, she still felt robbed of that time with her brother. And apparently since that initial falling out, she'd actually only seen her brother once. And that was when he and Helen had come to visit Lee-Anne and their parents in Australia just a couple months before he died. She says when she first met Helen, which was back in 2004, she just was your average housewife type. But then, like, the more they got to know Helen or heard stories from people near the couple, she kind of realized that actually this woman, like, was not totally stable. She said that on one visit to New Zealand, she visited Phil and Helen's place and found her brother, quote, just freaking out. Apparently Helen had actually tried to overdose on insulin. Or that is what she told Phil anyway. Lee-Anne said she tried to talk to Helen about this, but Helen's behavior was very much like attention seeking, and she could tell that this was just pure manipulation and that it actually wasn't the first time she'd pulled a stunt like this. And then that same time that her son Lance was visiting the couple in 2006, she learned about another strange conversation that she believes Helen was behind. So her brother Phil and her son Lance were having a chat in a pub, and it was all about Karen, which was Phil's first wife, and also the mother of his youngest son, Ben. And I'm guessing this is just entirely speculation because, you know, this is secondhand kind of feedback sort of thing, but apparently Phil actually asked Lance, his nephew, if he knew a hitman or could hire a hitman to take out Karen and maybe stage it like a house fire or something so it looked like an accident. And then Lance phoned his mother, Lee-Anne, back in Australia, and he was just completely distraught, as you can imagine. Like, this is a child. And this is that would be very, very upsetting to hear as a kid. Like, no matter what the circumstances, I would be upset if I heard anybody even joking about such a thing. So why would you have this conversation with a child? Like, I don't really know what Phil was thinking at that time, but it's odd. And Lee-Anne's response to this, like when her son phoned her, was just ignore it, don't have another conversation with them. But it's weird. And Lee-Anne thinks that the driving factor behind all this was Helen, and that she still saw Karen as being this big threat. And that, you know, this was kind of a way to get her out of the picture. But even Lee-Anne was like, no, this just seems too far-fetched and kind of insane, so she didn't tell the police. So after Philip's death, Lee-Anne did continue to have some on-off contact with Helen, and then she found, and she was quite surprised to learn, that Phil had actually died in his bed and not in his lorry as she'd originally been led to believe. And then Helen told Lee-Anne and the family that she believed Phil because he'd recently been diagnosed with narcolepsy. Now, narcolepsy is a neurological disorder that causes people to be excessively drowsy during the day, or even just fall asleep, like in any situation, which puts people in extreme danger and risk. So you could just be driving your car and then fall asleep, like through no fault of your own. So, you know, funeral's out of the way. Lee-Anne's like a bit kind of weirded out by some of Helen's behavior, and goes back to Australia, but she does maintain contact with Helen because she just has this feeling in her gut that, you know, like something is just not quite right. Okay, now remember a little while ago when I mentioned that Helen was chatting up an old flame during her police interview just 8 days after Philip died? Within just 3.5 weeks of her husband's completely unexpected, untimely death, Helen's ex-boyfriend, Barry Hayton, moved into the home at Checkett's Avenue with Helen, into the bed that Philip was literally sleeping in, like less than a month earlier. And on the 12th of July, Barry even bought her a ring, but he called it a friendship ring, even though she wore it on her engagement finger and it looked like an engagement ring. No. Barry said no, it was a friendship ring and there was no proposal. They were great mates, I guess. So obviously this set off huge red flags for Lee-Anne and Philip's family. Like, what the actual, like, look, again, I understand we all grieve in different ways, but I mean, like, you could be a bit more discreet, honestly. So Jump forward a few weeks after Philip's death, Lee-Anne received a phone call from Helen. And Helen told her that, and she was very emotional, that she had found a note. She said to Lee-Anne that she'd apparently found it in a safe, which could explain why it was never found in the initial police investigation, I guess. Although, to be fair, it's not like there was a police investigation, but still though, like a bit strange that it's taken literally weeks to find it. And why would he put it in a safe? Like if the intention was that it was found, why would you lock it away in a place that it wouldn't be found? Also strange that he sent that text, as you know, from like that first day when the police were there, but then he also wrote this letter, so. But anyway, I digress. Lee-Anne was heading back to New Zealand anyway for her son Lance's 21st birthday, and she arranged to stay with Helen and Barry. And Lee-Anne said that when she pulled into the driveway, there was Barry's brand new Kia Sportage, which she was like, okay, this is going to be weird. How awkward is this actually going to be? But she was nice about it anyway, and she came inside. Helen introduced Lee-Anne to Barry, and then they took all her bags into the bedroom before heading out into the lounge for a bit of a chit chat. So Lee-Anne was looking for a phone for the time that she was in New Zealand, and her son had given her one, but it wasn't working for some reason. And at this point, Helen offered Lee-Anne Phil's old phone and a SIM card which had credit that had to be used anyway. Lee-Anne was like a bit weirded out by this because it was quite upsetting, but she didn't really have any other option. She had a lot to do the next day, so she accepted. So Helen fixed them all drinks and Lee-Anne got comfortable on the couch. Then Helen kind of disappeared out the hallway, and as she came back, she was kind of like talking about this note that she'd found. She came back and handed it to Lee-Anne and said, here's the note that I found in the bedside drawer. Lee-Anne was bracing herself anyway because it was going to be upsetting and confronting, but like her little antenna perked up and she was like, bedside drawer? Didn't you say it was in the safe? But she didn't say anything obviously, but she, the cogs are turning. And then when she looked down in it, there were two things that struck her. Firstly, the letter was typed, which is always suspicious, as we know. And the note included that apparently Phil had discovered that his son Ben is not actually his biological son, that he couldn't live with this fact and he could never face him again. And Helen said apparently that the funeral director had taken DNA samples from Phil and compared them to Ben and confirmed that Ben was not Phil's son, which I've never heard of funeral directors doing that, but I guess that's what Helen said. And if this had been true, like if it was true that Ben was not actually Phil's son, then it means that Ben would not be entitled to any of Phil's insurance money. But it actually wasn't the contents of the letter that disturbed Lee-Anne quite so much. What freaked her out the most was that at the bottom of the letter was a handwritten signature signing off Phil's name. And straight away, she knew that there was no way that Phil could have written that letter. First of all, the man was left-handed, and apparently when he wrote, like he pressed really, really, really firmly and almost like engraved or indented in the page when he wrote. And this little signature was really light and wispy, as she described it, which she said told her immediately that that was definitely not Phil's handwriting by any stretch of the imagination. And at that point, Lee-Anne recalls that all these little weird things, odd behaviors and inconsistencies started to kind of like build up and form this big picture, and that at that moment she felt certain that Helen had killed her brother. And then Helen left the room again and came back with even more stuff. Apparently there was a picture of Phil with a lady who was dressed in 1930s flapper gear, and it looked as though they were off to a fancy dress party. But Helen claims that that was the woman that Phil was, quote, having an affair with, which is news to Lee-Anne. Also, apparently Phil kind of never looked any different as he aged, like he always kind of looked the same. So Lee-Anne said it was really impossible to tell like when actually that photo could even have been taken. Like it could have been taken 10, 20 years ago, but he looked the same. So it was hard to know. Helen then opened a Christmas card that Lee-Anne's parents had sent to Ben, Phil's son, and it had money inside it, and she just took the money out and gave it to Lee-Anne, and Lee-Anne's like, well, I'm not going to take this money. Like the son is still alive. Like why is she, like she can just give this card to him, but no, Helen thought it was appropriate to open it and give the contents to Lee-Anne, which was really odd as well. After that, Helen just continued to rip into Phil and like completely slander him and assassinate his character. She claims that she also found a little black book which detailed Phil's affairs, and apparently she also found a manual on how to be a male prostitute. Now you're probably wondering why at that point Lee-Anne didn't like get the F out of there. Like, why doesn't she immediately run and like call the police and report Helen and get her arrested? But there are a couple of reasons. First of all, she had too much to drink, so she couldn't drive anyway. She didn't even live in New Zealand. She didn't have anyone she could call. She didn't even have a working cell phone at that time, like with numbers on it that she could call. But mostly she was just in shock and just trying to process this information and process the reality of what she was kind of realizing. But also she realized that actually Lee-Anne realized she might actually be in danger. Like, if this was true, if what she believed was actually true, then Helen was a very, very dangerous woman, and she needed to be extremely careful about how much Helen knew that she knew, if you know what I mean. At that moment, she just had like no idea what to do next. She just needed some time. So she went into her bedroom and kind of barricaded the door with her suitcase, hoping that Helen wouldn't come knocking, but just to give her like a second. Then she tried to text her boyfriend back in Australia to say, oh my God, Helen's killed Phil. But then she realized that she has no credit on her phone and the text never went through. She said that she really had no means of getting out of there. It would have taken her an hour to walk anywhere that was safe. It was nighttime anyway. And if she did try to make an escape, Helen would be on to her. Although Lee-Anne did kind of reason that the chances of Helen doing anything to her were pretty slim, because it would be very dumb to have two people turn up dead in your house of suspicious circumstances. So it would not be very smart of Helen to try and pull anything. She also knew that, well, at least her children knew where she was, her boyfriend knew where she was, like where she was staying. So if anything did happen to her, there was a trail. Like, people would know that it leads straight back to Helen. So the next day was Lee-Anne's son Lance's 21st birthday party. And you can imagine Lee-Anne's kind of struggling to keep it together, and she has to bring Helen along. And she said that she felt like she was just betraying everyone by even engaging with her. But she just could not let on that she knew what Helen was up to, or like any suggestion, because it just would not be smart. She just had to play it cool, pretend everything was normal, and make sure that Helen did not cotton on to the fact that Lee-Anne knew what she'd done. Lee-Anne instead decided to double down on collecting evidence this week and then take everything that she had learned to the police before she left for Australia. So at the end of the week, Lee-Anne took a friend along to the police station. She met with the detectives who were originally involved in Philip's case. So it was Detective Sergeant Mark Keane, and they spent a bit of time talking through Lee-Anne's allegations before she made her formal statement. Lee-Anne said that when the detective asked her where the note was, she almost laughed. She said that she had had such a finite time to even come to the police station without being found out, let alone go rifling through Helen's things to try and find it. She had tried to find it, but she couldn't. It was gone. And also, wasn't that the police's job? Like, she didn't have a warrant. Like, couldn't the police just like issue a warrant and go and find it? But yeah, when Lee-Anne explained that the note was typed, the detective also acknowledged that that's really unusual. He said that in all of his entire career, he's never seen a typed note. And Lee-Anne's friend, who she brought along with her, also backed that up as being really unusual and strange. Apparently, he was a first responder in the volunteer fire brigade, so he had come across his fair share in his career. And never ever in any of these circumstances had he ever come across somebody who had left a typed note. During the conversation with the detective, Lee-Anne also mentioned Helen's odd behaviours and her lack of grief or emotion in any of the events after Philip's death, with the exception of the day, as you know. So the detective took a handwritten statement of what Lee-Anne had to report, and he outlined the family, their relationships, and all their different ties. He also included the breakdown of the relationship between Lee-Anne and Phil kind of as a result of Helen, and included all the stories that Helen had told Lee-Anne about Phil's affair. And he explained that all of this information would be passed on to the team who had initially looked into Phil's case. And Lee-Anne said that when she left the police station, she felt confident that he had listened to her and that they were going to take action. Spoiler alert, they did not. So it took 8 weeks after Philip's death before Helen gave the note to the detectives. However, there were a couple of changes. Apparently the wording on the note that she gave to the detectives had changed, and also this one had no signature. So it was just entirely typed. There was no handwriting at all. By this time, Lee-Anne had returned to Australia and she told the rest of the family what she had found out. And then her next step was to speak to the funeral director about Helen's claim that they had taken a DNA sample from Phil's body. And the funeral director was horrified at the allegation. They vehemently denied the claim and basically said that they just don't do that. Like, that is like illegal. Like, it is so morally and ethically wrong that it would never happen. Like, that is just not a thing that happens. And apparently he was so outraged at Helen's suggestion that he would do this, that he actually even threatened to take Helen to court for it. And I get that. Like, you can imagine if she's out here saying that and it's actually like against the code of conduct for your industry, that puts your career and your reputation on the line. Like, you cannot be slinging around allegations and accusations like that, even if she suggests that it was her request, like she wanted this. Anyway, I digress. Lee-Anne then actually arranged a DNA test through the correct channels, and she was able to prove that Ben was in fact Philip's son, thereby proving that his motive, if you will, was completely false. And then Lee-Anne spoke to Helen's colleagues, and what they had to say was staggering. Now, Helen's office manager at her Christchurch-based company Grounds and Services spoke at length to Lee-Anne about Helen had more than once talked about poisoning and killing someone. Gavin Moffat was among many of the colleagues who would later end up giving statements to police. He spoke of a conversation he had with Helen, who worked there as an administrator, where she said that she was a diabetic and she feared that her husband was trying to poison her with sugar. And then she asked him if Mitre 10, which is a hardware store chain here in New Zealand, sold rat poison. And he said he just laughed and asked, "What would you want that for?" And that she just like grinned and walked out. And he said that there was a strong implication that she was going to use it to poison her husband. Like, she never said that, but that was the gist. And then it gets even crazier. Apparently, when she used to turn up to work with muffins, her workmates would literally joke like, "Oh, hope Helen hasn't put rat poison in the muffins today." They literally used to joke about Helen being a poisoner, like well before any of this happened to poor old Phil. And then another colleague described Helen and Phil's relationship as being fraught with drama. Apparently, Helen always seemed to have a bug to bear with Phil, and as time went on, as the years went on, things just got more and more dramatic and frayed. Apparently, one of the things that she complained about all the time was Phil's job, and as we know, he was a truck driver, which can mean long shifts and time spent away from home. But at one stage, apparently Phil did work for a sales company, and it meant that he basically had to be away like every 3 weeks out of 4. So Helen was like alone quite a bit. And apparently Helen generally actually liked the idea of Phil being away because apparently, quote, she didn't have to put up with him. But then she'd also get really annoyed that he'd left her to it and that he wasn't there to help her out. So like, which one is it, Helen? Do you want him there or not? And so poor Phil just couldn't do anything right. Like, no matter what he did, whatever job he had, whatever situation he was in, Helen would find a reason to chew him out and get cross with him about it. So as I mentioned earlier, Phil took Helen to Australia like a few weeks before his death and started to hash out a plan to move there. And Helen just totally hated the idea. She was not interested at all. She didn't want to go. And honestly, that does make sense because everything we know about like controlling and abusive partners, their whole thing is to isolate and alienate you from any of your support network. So they cut off your resources one by one. And the fact that the idea of Phil moving closer to his family would have been a huge threat for Helen. Like, that is a big no-no if you're a total control freak. The idea is to remove you as much as possible from anybody in your life who you could possibly connect with. So yeah, I'm not surprised that Helen was not Team Australia. But all of this was also just a few weeks before Helen phoned the police in hysterics. And then a few months after Phil's death, Helen suddenly quit her job at Grounds and Services, and it was found out that she had actually by that stage been dubbed the Black Widow. Like, that was her colleagues who called her the Black Widow, like before Phil died, because of her weird behavior and chat about rat poison and poisoning people. But she was also later convicted of stealing $30,000 from the company, which is no joke. Like, I don't know how she got away with that for so long. This is Molly. She's my baby. And I love her very much, but she can also be very annoying. But she's like over 1 now. She turned, actually, you just turned 1 like a month ago. But yeah, when I got her when she was 8 weeks old, and now she's already more than 1. So, okay, she wants to go down. I'll put her down now. Now, Lee-Anne wasn't the only one with concerns and suspicions. Helen's own son, Adam Kearns, was suspicious the minute police knocked on his door to inform him of Phil's death. So in fact, Helen's son Adam was actually part of a group of people that went to the Papanui police station on the 13th of May 2009, so just a few days after Philip's death. They told detectives that they believed Helen had actually tried to take Phil's life like a month earlier in April. And in a formal statement, Adam told detectives of how his mother Helen had actually spoken to him before about wanting to kill Phil, and even talked to him about apparently hiring a hitman. Now, Adam said that he didn't take much notice because it was his mum, and but he did ask her, like, well, why don't you just break up with him? And apparently Helen said, well, if she left him, then she would lose half the house. And he also said that she often used to talk about Philip's life insurance policy, which apparently was something like $257,000. So on the night of April 15th, 2009, Adam said that he saw his mother in the kitchen with a couple of clear capsules. And he said that she was like putting them back together at the time and like wiping dust residue off the bench. He said that both of the capsules were stuffed with a pale blue powder and that it was not Panadol. Then Adam said that his mother told him that apparently Phil had a headache, which was why she was putting these pills together for him. And then he just lost the plot at her. He lost his temper and they had a fight. He said that he knew what she was up to, that she was trying to hurt Phil. But whatever the case, an hour later, he'd obviously gone to bed. An hour later, he was woken up by Helen, who said she was taking Phil to the hospital because he was vomiting and he was very unwell. So then the next day, it was kind of like the breaking point for Adam and Helen, and he moved out. But he said that he actually told Phil of his suspicions and said that she's trying to kill you, mate. And he just laughed it off like, oh, she wouldn't do that. Also, Adam claims that the night before Phil did die, Helen was asking around where the closest pharmacy was for her to get some Phenergan. So one of the people who accompanied Adam to the police station when he made his first complaint was actually Helen's own mother. So she's 82 years old. She went along with him because apparently she said she would not be surprised if her daughter was up to some shady shit. She said, this is so great and so funny, that, quote, it would come as no surprise if her daughter had been involved in Nisbet's death because she had caused problems since she was 10 years old. And apparently she claims to have a list documenting Helen's terrible behavior over the years, which is quite something to have, like a list of like specific bad things that you've done is quite something. And in fact, Helen's mother was so kind of exhausted by Helen that in fact she actually wrote her out of her will in 2006. Now apparently the media managed to get hold of like this list or this letter or whatever that Helen's mother claimed to have, detailing her shitty behaviors dating right back to childhood. And apparently right from like high school, she attended Hill Morton High. She used to steal from her classmates and actually completely cleared out her mother's bank account. And apparently they did choose not to press charges, but it was like a legit crime. They did eventually remove her from school and she was sent to Ritchie Secretarial College. I'm sorry, I'm laughing because I just can't believe this woman. But apparently after graduating, Helen did work as a typist, but she was actually fired for forging a letter from the Ministry of Health about her smoking in the staff room. So she forged a letter to her employer from the Ministry of Health. It's just quite funny. It's not funny, but you know, it's a bit funny. Then she worked at United Building Society, where she stole money from the till to apparently buy an engagement ring for this person that she'd supposedly fallen in love with. She was caught and she was fired, and then her parents ended up spending thousands of dollars in legal fees to settle the case so it wouldn't go to court. Then Helen moved to Wellington with her fiance, but when the engagement broke off, she returned to Christchurch, and apparently she was up to her eyeballs in debt at this stage. And her mother just says that throughout this whole thing, they just continued to have money dramas. Like apparently Helen's father would be having a shower, and while he was in there, she would just clean out his wallet. Like just take any money she could find in the house, which to be honest is giving like drug addict vibes to me. But apparently she wasn't, she was just a crappy person. And it gets even worse. The family believe, and I guess this is unproven, but they believe that Helen actually stole a huge sum of money from Helen's mother's invalid sister while cleaning her house sometime, that's just real crap. Like, she never showed any remorse either. Like across any of her behaviors, she was never grateful to be supported by her parents or bailed out or like sorry that she did it. She just kept doing it. So then her mother said that she eventually accepted that her daughter was either extremely mentally ill or, as she put it, evil. So at this stage, all the pieces were starting to come together for Lee-Anne, including the $250,000 insurance policy that we spoke about before that had been conveniently taken out a year before Philip's death. Lee-Anne said that the policy had been taken out like 13 or 14 months prior, and it had a exclusion in it. So that clause meant that if Phil died by within like a year of the policy being taken out, that they would not pay it out. So all this evidence that Lee-Anne had gathered, she passed it along to the police. And on the 30th of January 2010, which is actually like a very long time later, Helen gave her second statement to the police. Apparently a detective phoned her saying that they wanted to chat to her just to clarify some things and questions that had come up across the investigation. AKA, Lee-Anne had given them some quite suspicious evidence and they needed to look into it. And by that point, by the time Helen's second statement, her views on her marriage and how great it was had quite substantially changed. She then told detectives that she never thought that their marriage was actually that good. She then told detectives, when questioned about the note, that she had found it in Philip's briefcase and that the handwriting at the bottom did look like his. Two things. First of all, like, firstly, you said it was in a safe, then you said it was in the bedside drawer, now you're saying it was in a briefcase. But that's not what the detectives like initially jumped at. They were like, the suicide note you gave us didn't have a signature on the bottom, because remember, the one that she gave detectives later was different. To this, Helen replied, well, I haven't looked at it in such a long time. I guess I must just have like convinced myself that there was a signature when there was not. Then Helen started to go on about how sad she felt for herself because Philip's family had turned on her. She said she just felt so beaten by it all. Now, despite this, like the inconsistencies with the note, all of the work and evidence that Lee-Anne had pulled together for the police, to her shock and amazement, police took no action and Helen actually remained free. They did no further investigating. However, the year after Philip's death, Lee-Anne discovered that she could actually appeal directly to the coroner and request an inquest into his death. So the inquest was scheduled for November 2010. And apparently the day before the inquest was due to start, Lee-Anne went and visited the coroner, and it was Sue Johnson. She was very emotional, and basically she just wanted to have another look at the note that Milner had given to the police because it was part of the evidence. The reason they wanted to see it is that they believed it was fabricated and they had brought additional documents along to prove as such. However, the note that the coroner handed Lee-Anne and the family did not have the signature on it because that one was different to the one that Helen gave the police. And Lee-Anne just could not believe it. She knows that the one that she saw had a signature on the bottom, and we know that Helen even said, like, she stumbled in that interview with the police and said that it had a signature on the bottom, but this one didn't. So the inquest began at the coroner's court in Christchurch, and Helen took the stand and she talked about how high-strung Phil was and how it did not take much to upset him or tip him over the edge. She said that when the couple had visited Australia in March of 2009, which was when they had started to, well, Philip had decided to start planning that move. He'd been there for his birthday and to visit his family, and while he was there, he'd been bitten by an insect. And he had a bit of a reaction to it, so he took a low dose of Phenergan. Helen said it knocked him out for at least 6 hours, like this tiny small dose of Phenergan. So that's kind of the first suggestion or inkling we have of Philip's kind of intolerance / allergy to Phenergan. But she said that the day before Philip died, the couple had had, quote, one of their better days that they'd had together. They had a nice time, they went shopping, they went out for lunch, they talked about all the things they were going to do around the house. Again, red flags, like, that doesn't sound like a person who's planning to end things the next day, do you know? Or later that day, like it was later that night. She said she remembers having a really nice day and thinking, oh, maybe things in our marriage are going to turn around now. And then she said, but looking back, he was too calm. Helen says that the pair watched TV, had dinner, and then Philip showered and went to bed at around 9:30 p.m. She said she then joined him about an hour later and gave him a kiss before going to sleep. Then the coroner mentioned a text message that Phil had actually sent to his son Ben the night before he died. It said that he had washed his hoodie and he would take her around the next day. Helen said that she knew nothing of the text or the hoodie, and again, this kind of raises questions around, well, why would he be making these kinds of just very casual remarks about visiting someone if he was planning to end things that night. Helen then said that yes, her husband had been unwell 3 weeks earlier, and that on 15th of April 2009 he collapsed and she'd taken him to hospital. She said that the experts could not figure out what was wrong, but that they thought it might be in relation to the insect bite in Australia. Phil improved in hospital and he was later discharged back home into Helen's care. However, later that night, Phil deteriorated again and he had to be returned back to hospital. Again, who does this sound like? I'm thinking Beverly Allett, which again, I'll include a link up there if you haven't heard of that case, but sounds familiar. Then things got pretty heated in the courtroom because Phil's family, like Lee-Anne and their side, they can question and ask anything they want of Helen and any of the witnesses. So the exchange got pretty intense. They challenged Helen about the note that Phil had apparently left and claimed that it hadn't been written by him, and said that they knew him to be a laid-back, quiet guy with a tight group of friends. Phil's father, James, put it to Helen, where is that original note? The note that you showed Lee-Anne, because that sure as hell isn't the one that the police or the coroner have. We know that that's not the one that you showed us originally. However, Helen just doubled down and said that no, she'd given the original one to the police. So at the end of the inquest, it took 6 months for Coroner Sue Johnson to hand down her findings from the inquest. Based on all the evidence presented within the inquest and all the documents that she'd gathered afterwards, she said, quote, I consider that on the facts as established by the evidence before me, I am unable to reach the threshold required for a finding of suicide. So at this point, Detective Inspector Greg Merton took an interest in the case. He'd been following it in the media. It was very high profile here in New Zealand, like every step of the way, because it was just, you can imagine it's something out of like Victorian England. He reviewed the case files in May 2011 and he came to the conclusion that Philip's death was actually suspicious and needed to be investigated further. Finally, after all of this, after the inquest, Police finally launched a homicide investigation. At this point, Lee-Anne once again presented them with all the evidence that she'd originally gone to them with, like right after Phil's death. Detective Senior Sergeant Greg Merton said, quote, "The initial things that concerned me were that he'd taken out a new life insurance policy 14 or 13 months beforehand, and the second thing was that she was the sole beneficiary. The third thing was the suicide text." So as the investigation finally began in earnest, family, friends, and work colleagues of the couple were all interviewed. Financial, phone, and email records were all examined, and their home in Checkett's Ave was searched twice. Following this, Helen was finally arrested on October the 27th, 2011. She was charged with Philip's murder and the attempted murder of Phil those 3 weeks prior. And by time the trial actually began on December the 2nd, 2013, the web of lies and crap that the police had uncovered was mind-boggling. The first thing that investigators looked to was where and how were the Finnegan tablets acquired, and by whom, right? So that's really key to know. Did Phil go out and get them himself? Did Helen buy them? Did someone else buy them? Where did they come from? So during their investigation, detectives found that on April 15th and then again on May 2nd, 2009, a woman calling herself Andrea Wilson used cash to buy a box of Finnegan tablets from a chemist in Christchurch. And this was on April 14th, 2009, so the day before the first attempt on Phil's life. And who the heck is Andrea Wilson, you might be wondering? Like, where does that name come from? Well, in 2002, Andrea Wilson, who worked as a personal banker here in Auckland, which is where I live, was convicted of trying to kill her partner by lacing his food with sleeping tablets. And apparently the tablets left a sour taste in his mouth, so the man did not finish his dinner, and thank God, because he would have died. And then it gets crazier. Apparently, Andrea Wilson later sprinkled his pillow with lavender oil to hope that he would, drift off peacefully into the land of Nod. And then when he was fast asleep, coupled with the sleeping tablets, she poured petrol all through their home before setting it on fire. And while the blaze caused extensive damage, by some extreme miracle, nobody was hurt. And Miss Andrea Wilson was jailed for attempted murder, theft as a servant, forgery, and arson. So she's like a real nice gal, nice lady. So investigators had spoken to local chemists about who had purchased a box of these Finnegan tablets on or around the date in question. And chemists came back and spoke of this Andrea character. And so they then discovered that Helen Milner's bank card had been used to withdraw $20 in cash just meters away from the chemist where the Finnegan in question was actually purchased. However, I just think it's so funny that she really thought she was doing something when she bought these drugs under this alias. Like, she thought she was so clever. Like, no one will know. Like, how smart of me to choose the alias of this woman, like, who was a convicted poisoner. She annoys me so much. She really gets under my skin, and just something about her smug little face, and she just thought she was doing something there, okay? So moving on in the trial, police interviewed about 8 people who had all seen the note. And these 8 people saw the version of the note that had the handwritten signature. So again, the fact that it took police, like, they never acted on the fact that like all these people had seen this handwritten signature note, and then the one that Helen gave them didn't have a signature. Like, that alone seems like extreme cause for concern. Like, that's really suspicious. They also uncovered how family and friends said that Helen had repeatedly talked about different ways to dispose of her husband. Apparently she'd even said, maybe she could drug him and then he'll crash his delivery truck and like die on the job. And even more incredibly, Helen's oldest son, so there's 2, and like the first one is one of the ones that went to the police. This is the other one. Apparently he said that she even offered him $20,000 to off Phil. And then after his death, she told family and friends all these conflicting stories about why he had died. So she told some people that it was because he just learned he had narcolepsy. She told other people that it's because Ben wasn't really his son, which we know is complete crap. And it also became apparent, like it was revealed during the trial, that the whole narcolepsy thing was total bullshit as well. Like that was just another thing that she made up. So the Crown prosecutor, she put it to Helen, her case basically was that Helen was deeply unhappy in her marriage, up to her eyeballs in debt, and needed a way out basically. Apparently she was in huge financial shit and was spending well beyond her means, and if Phil died, she stood to gain and benefit quite substantially in a financial sense. They also confirmed that the clause in Philip's life insurance policy ran out 2 months before his death, which is also, you know, when those 2 attempts on his life were carried out. So the court heard that Helen was expecting to get, between life insurance and ACC payouts, $336,000 after Phil's death. And if she sold their home in Christchurch as well, she would have been $500,000 in the green. So police believe the version of events that took place is that on the night that Philip died, Helen cooked him dinner. Apparently she didn't eat with him, and she crushed up the Phenergan tablets and put it into a chicken tonight, like kind of instant casserole, chicken on rice sort of dish thing. They believe it either would have killed him outright or that Helen may have actually suffocated him after. He would have been completely sedated at the time, so either way, here's hoping that poor sweet Phil had no idea what was happening. Then prosecutors alleged that Helen would have set the scene. She would have spent the rest of the night kind of staging things to look as she told the police the next day. She also would have sent herself that text from his phone. Then in the morning, she dialed 111 and reported that her husband was found dead in his bed. So on December 19th, 2013, a jury of 7 men and 5 women deliberated for 7.5 hours over a 2-day period to deliver their unanimous verdict to the High Court in Christchurch. And apparently Lee-Anne and the rest of Phil's family all rushed to the courtroom, and they actually brought Phil's ashes with them so that they could all be together when the verdict was handed down. And apparently Helen was just weeping away in the dock the entire time that all of this happened, feeling very sorry for herself, although apparently she'd been quite stoic, I guess, and sort of standoffish throughout the actual trial proceedings. So this was an unusual display of emotion, according to reporters. When the verdict was read, it confirmed that the jury found Helen guilty on all counts. Justice David Gendel, who was the judge presiding over the case, remanded Helen into custody until sentencing on February 20th, 2014. He also ordered a pre-sentence report and, at the request of the defense, a psychiatric evaluation. Now, at the time that this trial was going on, let me tell you, it does not end there. The situation gets even wilder. So Helen was actually already serving time in jail in December during her trial. She was at the Christchurch Women's Prison for framing her son for a crime he did not do. So in March 2010, Helen bought a cell phone and started sending abusive text messages to herself, claiming to be her son, Adam Cans. Sorry, Adam. And at the time, Adam was actually subject to a protection order and prohibited from having any contact or interaction with his mother at all. So like a restraining order. So because of this, Adam was arrested, he was denied bail, and he spent 18 days in jail for a crime he never did. And he was kept in jail for those 18 days before he was finally released. So Helen actually later pled guilty to perverting the course of justice and was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in prison in August 2012. So following all of that, her son actually sued her for $60,000 in damages, of which she was served during the murder trial. Later, the court actually ruled in favor of her son, and Helen was ordered to pay her son $55,000 in damages, which we all know Helen doesn't have. I actually don't know what the restitution situation is here in New Zealand. I know that I hear all the time in the States that you only have to pay back like $100 a month till you like die, but I don't know how you pay that back here. Probably the same, because what are you going to do if you're in jail? Like, you got nothing. So I don't know, but it's still crazy. So then at the High Court in Christchurch on February 20th, 2014, that was the day of Helen's sentencing. The same judge, Justice David Gendel, sentenced Helen Milner to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 18 years. And that is pretty much the toughest sentence you can get here in New Zealand. Essentially, no matter what, life in prison means 17 years. And I don't know why it's 17, but that is what it is. And then at 17 years, you can apply for parole. He also sentenced her to 6 years jail time for the attempted murder charge. And he ordered this to be served concurrently, and apparently also gave her like a first strike warning, but I don't know why, because I think she's, based on her shady childhood and young adulthood and then all of her bullshit, I feel like that's a bit dumb. But anyway, I'm not a judge. So Justice David Gendel said, quote, "Death by poisoning has always been among the most despicable of crimes, often involving motive, premeditation and planning, subterfuge and an unsuspecting innocent victim. All are present in this case." So after the trial and the sentencing and all of that, a damning internal police report in New Zealand was leaked to the media that states that Helen would probably have gotten away with murder if not for Lee-Anne's doggedness and her amateur sleuthing. Like, she basically broke this case wide open. And Lee-Anne spent thousands of dollars on flights and phone calls, not to mention the cost of losing time with loved ones, losing her job. Like, she couldn't work during this time. So there are all these additional costs that she also sacrificed at the same time in order to bring her brother's killer to justice. She did seek compensation from the New Zealand police, and they did agree to give her a payout. That amount is undisclosed, but I know that initially they approached her with a sum, which she declined because she wanted more. And whatever it was that they offered, I can guarantee it wouldn't have been enough, because this bitch literally would have gone free if not for Lee-Anne's work. Like, this is supposed to be their job. And Lee-Anne says she's actually kind of never financially recovered from the cost of the case, but apparently with the money that the police gave her to compensate, she was able to kind of recoup some of the cost of putting the case before the coroner, and she was able to pay off her parents' credit cards. So that's nice. However, she and the rest of Philip's family were disappointed because they never received like a formal apology or anything from New Zealand police or any of the detectives involved in the investigation. Now, following her fight for justice, Lee-Anne actually went on to study a Bachelor of Criminology and Justice at the University on the Sunshine Coast. So that's quite cool. She's going to carry on. I think she's a private investigator now or something along those lines. So she's totally like, what a badass, you know? Like, if I've got an unsolved case, I know who I'm gonna call. Lee-Anne's hope is to work in the justice system and hopefully make the process less stressful for victims. She also wrote a book about the case, some of which I used to reference this video, and the book was actually later adapted into like a made-for-television movie by New Zealand On Air. In August 2014, Helen appealed her conviction at the Court of Appeal, which was rejected. In April 2015, she appealed her conviction to the Supreme Court, which was also rejected. However, there are semi-recent developments in this case, and the most recent thing happened in 2020. Helen returned to the Court of Appeal on the 2nd of October in 2019 to fight for the release of her husband's body samples for further testing. And they did actually grant her this bid. So the body samples are held by the Institute of Environmental Science and Research, otherwise known as ESR. And apparently Helen and her defense, their goal is that further testing of these samples may help in a plea for mercy to the Governor General. However, there are questions around how reliable those test results might be, because after so many years, those body samples, they just degrade. Like, no matter how well they're preserved, it's really difficult to stop them from deteriorating. So a lot of the initial upfront evidence, including toxicology results, are probably gone by now. So you can understand why Philip's family are really upset at the outcome of the decision. They just want to move on. They feel like it's a wild goose chase at this point, and they think it's disrespectful to Philip to continue to drag this out, especially for tests that are largely going to be inconclusive. Quote, "The family is devastated that the Court of Appeal are allowing her to violate the last part of Phil on a completely outrageous and unfounded goose chase," Lee-Anne told the New Zealand Herald. We are utterly disappointed that the court wasn't prepared to apply any filter of common sense, but rather they have awarded a murderer the automatic right to these, Phil's last human remains, over the rights of us, his family. Lee-Anne said that the family felt tormented by the case, by which at that point had dragged on for a decade. Now, as of filming this video, there has been no further updates to the case. I haven't seen any new information on it. I don't know if the samples have been sent away for further testing. I don't know how long these things take. But as of filming, which we are in March 2023, there is no further updates. However, if any do come along, if we hear any news, I will pin it to the top comment in the comment section below. And then as far as the shady and very botched police investigation goes, the Nisbet family want changes to police procedure. They want every suspicious death to be treated as a homicide. And ever since, police have refused to release any internal documents or findings in regards to an internal investigation into how this was handled. They've been very cagey about the whole thing. However, Canterbury District Investigations Manager, Detective Inspector Tom Fitzgerald, did confirm that the police's initial finding of the investigation had failed in several aspects. You don't think. But he would not comment on the internal report that was leaked that stated basically bullet by bullet all the ways in which the investigation had failed. Quote, "We accept that some aspects of the initial inquiry were not handled thoroughly. The initial investigation wasn't treated as a homicide as it should have been, and many of the points you raise are as a result of that." And apparently the officers involved in the initial investigation had their errors brought to their attention, but there was no further punishment than that, according to Fitzgerald. And he said, quote, "I'm confident they will never make those mistakes again." And I'd love them to tell us why they're that confident, because we all know, we see it all too often, no matter where in the world you are, like truly, like down here in New Zealand, in the States, everywhere, the police seem to have this same consistent kind of oversight of these things. Like, why does this keep happening? Why do these mistakes slip through? Why do obvious red flags keep being ignored? However, Fitzgerald did pay tribute to Lee-Anne Cartier's work, saying, quote, "She did a fine job. Unfortunately, she should not have had to have done that, and I can feel for the families." So that is where we leave today's story. And in closing, I guess what baffles me is how this woman got away with everything that she did. Like, it just seems that everywhere Helen Milner went, trouble followed. And she didn't sound like a nice woman. Like, she just didn't sound like a very nice lady. She sounds like she was deeply unpleasant to be around, horrible wife, horrible friend, joked about killing her husband. And a thief, like an outright thief from anybody she could thieve from. And it's just amazing to me that despite all of this, police were so sure that they just had an open and shut case on their hand that it took this inquest and this fight from Phil's family for them to actually do anything about it. And it just makes me wonder how many cases are mishandled or badly carried out or completely screwed up that never are addressed because the family either doesn't know how to push back or they don't have the means to do so. So even though Lee-Anne was able to recoup a lot of her costs, the fact that she was actually able to kind of front up the cash to do that initial work that led to the investigation and arrest, most people can't do that. Like, I can't just quit my job and become a full-time sleuth. I wish. It just amazes me that we see this police incompetency everywhere. You know, it doesn't seem to be unique to one place or one country or one culture. It seems that everywhere around the world we see the same mistakes being made by the police. And I would love to hear from them exactly what they're doing to address those concerns. I know that in New Zealand there have been many cases where murders should not have happened at all because they knew that the person accused was a danger to the person that they ended up taking the life of. So that's my rant for the day, I guess. And if you're still with me, thank you so much for being here. And I know it was a long one. I hope you were interested in this case. I hope that I answered most of your questions. I appreciate you being patient with me as I, brush the dust off and kind of stretch my legs again and get used to being in front of a camera. So I have another video for you very soon. Until then, thank you so much for being here. If you liked this video, please do. And if you want to subscribe, please do. I feel like this case is insane and full of twists and turns, and at every point it just gets more wild, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. So let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.